Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the NEC, and thank you for coming to see my presentation this morning. Just got a couple of quick questions to ask you. Who's here to buy a franchise this weekend? Yes? Yep, good. And who's here to build a £1 million business? Excellent, excellent. A few more of you. That's good. Well, franchising is a really good option for building a really good business. As we know, each franchise has a proven business model that you can work with, and you should follow that to the letter. But you also get the support and the guidance from the franchisor's team as well. And they tend to have a lot of understanding and knowledge about the business that they're running. So they always take that with both hands. Anything that they can give you, take the advice that they give you. But the other things about franchising, the things that aren't in that manual and they're not in the playbook, those are the things that are really, really important that you know. And these things come from within yourself quite a bit. So I don't want to get too airy-fairy about this, but it's things that come from you and you put into your business that are the really important things that I want to talk to you about today. So my name is Julie Farrow, and along with my colleague Richard Stanfield, we support the Walfinch franchise network with growing their business. I've been working in franchising for 17 years now, supporting people all the way from signing their first agreement, all the way up to being 15-year-old multi-million pound businesses, and obviously everything in between. So I've had lots of experience with people in all different sizes of business as well. So what I'm going to do today, as I say, is go through some of the things that aren't really often in the manual, but the things that are really, really important to think about if you're starting your entrepreneurial journey. At the end of the slides as well, we've got an entrepreneurial test. So there's a QR code for that, and I'll bring it up on the screen at the end. So the first thing, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear, but in the first 6 to 12 months of running a business, things are uncomfortable. You do have to do things for the first time that you've never tried before, that you might not be comfortable with doing. If you're an accountant, you might not have managed people before, but if you're somebody who has managed people, you might never have done any marketing. So it's really about embracing getting uncomfortable and really growing your comfort zone, because that's going to be really, really important as you grow the business. You can hold the business back if you avoid getting outside of your comfort zone. And we're always there to help you with that, or your franchisor team. The second thing is 10 hats. So at the very, very beginning, you will be wearing every single hat there is. You'll be everything to your business. But as you get bigger, as your business grows, you really must bring in the skills and the knowledge of other people so that you can expand your business. So I've got a few cautionary tales to tell you along the way. So I've worked with a few franchisees, as I said, and I worked with a lady once, and she had built her business really well. She'd gone from 0 to 30k a month. Oh, it keeps going on. From 0 to 30k a month, she was doing really well. But that's where the business stopped, and she got to, I think other people at the same level of business were going past her, getting to the 60, 70k mark by the end of year 2. But by the end of year 2, she was still sat there at 30k. And it's because she just wouldn't trust anybody. She wouldn't bring anyone into the business and, trust them to really help her grow the business. She felt that she could have better control if it was just her. But she got to a point where she could only do that much work. She just couldn't go any further. So I encourage you always to be looking for the next person that you need in your business and make sure you're bringing them in. And there's a bit more advice on those people a bit later on. So learn to deal with difficult conversations. This is a bit of a negative story here, but I'll tell you because it's important. One of the only failures I ever saw in my 17 years in franchising, but there was a franchisee who had accidentally recruited too many people in his team. He'd overdone it. The costs were too much, and he was running out of money. And he needed to have 3 very difficult conversations. He needed to make 3 of those people redundant, and it was very hard. And he didn't want to have those conversations. I think anybody else wouldn't want to, but they would do it. But he didn't have those conversations. He ran out of money, and then he had to have an even harder conversation with all 5 people, and he lost his business. So it's just really, really important that you lean into the difficult parts of it, and with the support of your team as well and your fellow franchisees, because it's once you nail it, once you get used to it, it does become a bit less emotional and it becomes easier for you to do. This is a nice point, I think. Promote confidence. This is a very personal story. When I first started out in franchising, I was very green. I didn't know anything about anything. I had to send a really important email to an important person, and I was very unprepared for it. And I told my MD at the time, who owned the franchise, he was the franchisor, and he said, well, you write the email and then send it to me, and I'll have a read through and I'll tell you what needs changing. And I said, great, okay. So I wrote the email and I sent it to him, and he wrote back, perfect, send it. And at the time, I was like, oh my God, cool, I'm better than I thought, actually. And I sent the email off. Obviously, looking back 17 years later now, I know there was mistakes in it. I know I'd missed things out in it. But he knew that at that moment I needed that confidence. I needed to feel like I was doing the right thing, because next time I'd be that bit more confident to do it. I know it's a very polarized view, but it's really important to promote confidence with people and not micromanage them and hold on to them too tightly, because confidence grows and then they'll be the best versions of themselves, you know. Next one, right people, right seats. I don't know if anybody's ever read Traction by Gino Wickman. It's a really good book. He created the EOS system, which is the entrepreneurial operating system. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's fantastic. We use it within our business, and one of the things in it is have the right people in the right seats. You know, if you've got someone who's not quite getting it, not quite wanting it, and they can't do the job, don't waste time trying to flog a dead horse, as it were. But you know, if they need retraining, retrain them, but be close to that and make sure that everybody in your business is meant to be there in the seat that they're in. I've got an example of this. It wasn't somebody doing something bad, but it's an example of really making sure you've got the right people. So during COVID, it was a crazy time for everybody. And during COVID, we had, in the care sector, it was a very busy time, but in a very different way. And I had a franchisee that I worked with. He had a brilliant marketing manager. She was fantastic, really good at her job. But during COVID, the last thing he needed was a marketing manager, because so many people wanted to avoid care homes, like, you know, at any cost because of what was happening. So loads of people were flocking to home care, so we didn't need marketing at the time. But what he did need was a live-in care manager, somebody to take over a very busy part of the business. And clearly his marketing manager didn't know anything about that job, so he could have just said to her, can you stop doing that and start doing this? But she wouldn't have been the right person for that job. So he made the very difficult decision of making her redundant and actually taking on an expert in live-in care for that role. That's what the business needed. Emotionally, it was very difficult for him, and sentimentally, he didn't want to do it. But he did make that decision for the business because it was the right business decision. He did get her back 2 years later, thank God, but he might not have done. But he did make the right decision for the right reasons, and that was what was important. Set expectations right away. So when somebody joins you, yes, the job description's there, they've got prior experience, so you think they should be able to just drop in and fulfill this role and start doing what they're meant to be doing. But quite often, people don't know your expectations, so you might expect them not only to do the marketing, but you might expect them to go out and do some networking or do something else in the business, and have particular standards. But if you don't tell them what those are, they won't know. So your social media people and your videographer could be walking around with a hoodie on with another brand on it. And if you don't tell them what your expectation is, you don't expect them to follow that. I hope you're not getting bored of my stories, but there's so many examples of these things happening in real life. I was looking after a franchisee in London, and he had a registered manager. So in the care sector, you have to have a registered manager who runs the operation for you. And he took her on. She was doing really well for a few months, but then it turns out we did a bit of an audit, and she wasn't very good at the compliance. She was very good at recruiting people, very good at managing people, but wasn't very good at the compliance. So he let her go, and he found somebody who was an expert in compliance, brought her on and said, here you go, here's your job, you're really good at compliance, make sure that she's good to go. But she wasn't very good at retention or recruitment, so people started to leave and the business didn't grow. So he hadn't really set the expectation that just because you're good at this, you need to do these other things as well. And long story short, he ended up going through 3 managers and then hired the first one that he'd had again, because he realised then that actually he just needed to polish someone. Everybody's got their good parts, haven't they? But not everyone can do everything. So you need to make sure that everybody is very clear on what the expectations are in the business. So no man is an island. We talk about relationships a lot within Walfinch, and I'm sure all franchisors will do the same. It's really important that you build relationships, and joining a franchise network is amazing because you get to meet all of the other franchisees. They've all been in the same boat as you. Hopefully you'll join with other new ones as well, so you're in the same situation together and can support each other as well. But it's really important to maintain relationships throughout the network, but also with the franchisor. Because, as I said before, we've got lots of knowledge and experience that we can help you get through any problems that you come across as you grow. Setting KPIs is really important. I'll give you an example why. So I was looking after a franchisee, and they had their care business, very successful. And we were looking at the data, we were looking at the metrics, and the metric was that 90% of assessments should turn into a client. That was the normal kind of percentage. And his was down at 75%. And he said, well, it's not too bad. And I said, it's not, but why do you think that is? And when we looked at the individual people that were doing that job, there was 2 people doing the same job, and the data was all merged, So when we looked at them individually, one of them was converting everything, and the other one wasn't converting that much. And when he put the numbers together, it looked okay. So the point was that one supervisor was doing fantastically well, and the other one wasn't really that suited for the job, and she wasn't really getting it. But he didn't know that because they didn't have individual KPIs. So once he set them, retrained that supervisor, she did actually very well after that, and he was able to then give them praise, and give them individual support on what they needed, and not just the supervisors, but everyone in the business. So really, really important for everybody to have really clear KPIs that are based on their job. Networking, and we talk about this very great deal, actually. We talk to our franchisees about networking all the time. If you sit in your office and do nothing, and just expect work to come to you, it tends not to. You do need to get out there and get well known in your community, especially within the care sector. I actually looked after a franchise once who was so good at networking. He networked all the time, and no word of a lie, he wore his PIN badge from the care company I worked for at the time to his own wedding, because he was always working and always talking to people about the business. I'm not joking, there's photos of him at the altar with his badge on, and I'm sure he put it on his dressing gown at night as well when he was sat there. So it's really, really important to network and get out there, and don't just be on your own, because the opportunities come when you network with other people. A few more. So know your numbers. It sounds very obvious, I know, but stay very close to your accountant. Make sure you know where your break-even point is. Very important in the first year. Make sure you know your gross margin, your net margin, and all those figures and numbers, because if you happen to be in a situation where your business grows very quickly often the cash flow can go a bit offline. So you end up having to pay your staff before you get your invoices in. So your cash flow can be a bit disjointed. And so if a few months before you know that's going to happen, you can go to your bank and say, we're going to get to a point where our cash flow is going to go out of sync. At that point, your bank will be much happier to say, okay, well, let's sort out maybe a temporary overdraft to cover that for the next few months in case it happens. They don't like it so much when you run in there on payday with a load of angry people running behind you saying they haven't been paid. They don't appreciate you walking in there then and panicking. They like when you know in advance that something is going to happen. They're much more willing to help you. So just know your numbers and do your monthly management accounts with your accountant. So prepare and plan sounds obvious again. I'm sure every single franchise here will ask you to do a marketing plan, a business plan, and it's really important to have those plans so that you know where you're going, you know how much money you're going to need, you know the people you're going to need for the business. But preparing is a different thing a bit. So the example I'm going to give you is a franchisee organised a 40,000 leaflet drop to go out in the city that they worked in. Brilliant. Great thing to do. It works really well in the care sector. So 40,000 leaflets, all about live-in care. So it's where a carer actually lives in the home with the person full-time. It's a great bit of business. It's good business for care providers to do. And he put these leaflets out anyway. And about 8 weeks later, we know that leaflets have about an 8-week life cycle. So I went to see him and I said, so how many live-ins did you get from the leaflet drop? And he said, none. And I said, how did that happen? So we had a look at all the data and we saw that a huge spike of phone calls coming in that 8 weeks, especially in the first few weeks after those leaflets had gone out. And I was confused. And what had happened was he had got ahead of himself and said, right, we're going to start doing live-in, but he didn't tell his team. So the people answering the phone were all answering all these hundreds of phone calls coming in, but they didn't know how to talk about live-in. So they just talked about what they did know, which was hourly care. So he took on this huge amount of hourly care clients from these leaflets, but no live-ins. And it was just because he hadn't prepared the team. He hadn't told them what he was doing. So it's always a good idea to make sure your team understand what's coming next. You know from a business point of view, but they need to know often from an operational point of view. So it's really key for them to know that. Don't be a busy fool. I mean, none of us want to be a busy fool, I'm sure. But it's really important that it kind of goes along with knowing your numbers, okay? So again, in the care sector, we've got quite a disparity between local authority work and private work from a price point. It's just the way it is in the UK, and it has been for a long time. So the example I would give is we had two businesses in London and they had the same turnover. So if you were looking at a report of turnover, you'd think these guys are doing equally as well, and they were both doing pretty well. But one of them had just private work. They had 150 clients, but very small ones. So it might be one visit a day, a couple of visits a week, that sort of thing. So very small clients, but lots and lots of them, and all private. And the other business had 35, I'll call them local authority customers, but they were essentially a PCT at the time, Primary Care Trust. So the price point was much lower, but they were much busier because they were, much more complex clients for end of life, that kind of thing. So lots and lots of changes needed in their worlds all the time, in their care plans. So this team had about 7 people working in the office for their 35 clients. And those guys had 3 people for their 150 because of the amount of resources they needed. So these guys were making about 1% margin. The guys over there were making 24% margin, but exactly the same revenue. So it's just really be looking at where you are right now and what sort of business you're creating, because just keep an eye on those margins and keep an eye on your most profitable business and make sure that you've got a good balance. Do it all, but make sure there's a good balance and make sure your team know that as well. So if you say to your team, right, I want you to grow by 50k in the next 6 months, they'll do that with the easiest thing. They'll go to the door that's open. Whereas if you want them to go to the more profitable work, you need to tell them that. Otherwise, they'll go because they're not thinking about the profit. They're not thinking about it from your point of view. So just make sure you're really guiding them on that. This is a bit towards those two other things. Always be gathering data. In any sector, when you first start your business, it's just you. You've got no prior record. You've got no data at all. So you have to rely on your franchisor giving you some expected data, some generic readings, I suppose. But when you start trading, you can gather that data. And so many people forget to, because they get very busy, they're learning lots of things, they're outside of their comfort zone, and it's very easy to forget to do it. But please gather that data, because in 6 months' time, when you're thinking, hang on a minute, why have I lost a few members of staff here? What's happened? You can look at your data and you can look for trends. So for example, you could, a company's lost a few carers or quite a lot of carers, they can look back at the trends of why people have left. And people do exit interviews, but tend to say, oh, it's because I've got another job. But why were they looking for another job? They don't tell you that, do they, often? But you can look at your leavers data and actually see that all the people that have left were all working 12 days in a row, or they were all working, 60 hours a week, or something like that, or they were all driving miles and miles around the territory all the time. So if you can look for trends, why somebody might be unhappy and why they might leave, you can then change things within your business for future staff members and look for those trends. So you won't know them unless you gather that data. So try and make time for it as soon as you can. And this is the last of my sermons, but this is develop your scorecard. So the EOS system, Traction by Gino Wickman, the book, it's they talk about a scorecard, and that's where we got that from. Basically, just have 3 or 4 data points that are absolutely critical to your business. It might be hours, it might be margin, but it might be something much more simple, like how many people did we speak to last week? How many hands did I shake? If you know what those very few metrics are, have them in a meeting every single week. Look at them weekly so that you can see if the business is going in the right direction or the wrong direction. Don't confuse yourself with the P&L and the balance sheet and everything. Just have a few numbers that will tell you if you're working hard enough and moving in the right direction, or if you're slipping, and it's really important to know what those numbers are, but you'll work that out as you start your business. So that's me and my sermons. Sorry about all the life lessons there, but they're things that I've learned over the last 17 years, and they're important. This is our wonderful leader, Amrit Dhaliwal. He's not here today, but you can follow him on all of his channels. He does a great podcast, the Walking with Walfinch, but he's the Walking franchisor. So he's does a load of stuff with that. It's really good, so please have a look. And if any of you would like to find out if you are an entrepreneur in the making, please do our QR code here and test yourself. It only takes a couple of minutes to do it, and you can, from doing it, you can find out if this sort of business would be the right one for you. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.